Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the unequal application of the law. Now, it's in various constitutions of a variety of white countries that everybody is equal before the law, and the law will be and is applied equally, but that's not the case. Increasingly, white people, particularly males and white Christians, are being discriminated against openly and brazenly and aggressively, by the way. And there's no human rights groups, or there's no government agency or NGO that's running around suing people for that. There's no pushback or accountability on. So, when Donald Trump won the Iowa caucus just yesterday, and run it by quite a stretch, and there was one TV sort of station that said, well, it was just white people, white Christians, and white men, and Nazis, and anyone who votes for Trump's a Nazi, and this sort of thing. Now, apart from the fact it was outrageously untrue and unfactual and just absolute silly nonsense, there was no one on the panel that go, hey, a minute. Now you look at the other way, I suppose. It's just those stupid black people that voted for, then the place went uproar, but international headlines. So, when a white person's fired from a job, it's like, but when a black person's fired from a job, it's racism, and it's this, and it's white supremacy, and so on. And same as if a career criminal engaged in an illegal act dies from an overdose, it's enough, and they're black, it's enough to have national riots that are funded and pushed by just about every NGO imaginable. So there are now many, I wouldn't say the majority, but now many adverts on job boards where they specifically say or infer very strongly that straight white males are not welcome. I can go into meetings now in companies in downtown Sydney where there may be no white people other than myself. There may be no white people in the room in Sydney, Australia, that is. And I'm sitting there with a bunch of affirmative action people, none of whom are qualified to do their jobs. Half of them don't even fucking speak English. And you have a look at some of these people and say, what? How did you even get employed, let alone keeping your job for more than 1 second? So clearly, white people in the West are being discriminated against, particularly white men, and even again, particularly Christians. White culture and history is under permanent assault. If you're a black lesbian from history, then you're a god. If you're a high achieving white guy, then you're Hitler, and so on. Now, I'm very much an advocate of equality before the law. So if it's illegal to criticize Islam, criticize a mosque or something like that, then if that's illegal, and you'll be pursued by all sorts of NGOs and government departments, and even private companies will come after you or deplatform you, and banks will freeze your accounts, this sort of thing. If that happens for criticizing Islam, then it must also happen for criticizing any other religion, because then that's equality before the law. It can't only be illegal if it's against Islam, or only be illegal if against, I don't know, Judaism or something. It must be equally so that if you criticize Christianity, you will suffer exactly the same penalties as if you were to criticize Islam. And there'll be government departments that will pursue you, prosecutors departments, that's how they pursue you with just as much vigor as the people who may criticize Islam. Also, on the relative basis, that if a white person criticizes Islam, then that's really, really fucking bad. But if a black person criticizes Islam, they're black, who cares? See, that's not equality before the law. And so we're seeing that equality before the law is actually some distant relic. It's something we see in the rearview mirror and a long way back. And we've lost that ability to apply the law equally, and that all are equal before the law. Doesn't matter where it's and we see just about in every area where white people are castigated and criticized, and accused of being white supremacists or Nazis, or they're all Hitler, and this sort of stuff. That should be every bit as illegal as accusing all black people of being idiots or something like that. It should be exactly the same. And if we went back to that, to whatever extent it existed, if we went back to that, and if it's not in the past then created today, that we're all equal before. You criticize Christianity, you go to prison. Same as if you criticize Islam or Judaism or Zoroastrian or whatever you criticize. That's it. You can't criticize it, or it can all be criticized in exactly the same way. And so this idea of making allowances for the cultural past, well, that person used to be, or that person's ancestors used to be a slave 200 years ago, so they don't have to be accountable to the law today because of that. This sort of thing. And so equality before the law is absolutely met. Now, if we had equality before the law, all this affirmative action and all this sort of stuff, a lot of it would disappear. A lot of the attacks on unjustified and fabricated, a lot of the attacks on white people and so on, for no other reason other than they're white, that would stop as well, because these people would have a really real risk of being dragged through the courts and maybe ending up in prison and having to pay large fines. So they're quite okay if white people get fined for criticising brown and black people. That's okay, nothing wrong with that. But when white people are criticised unjustifiably, then that's supposed to be, well, who cares? So you get these panels where they're all piling in on white people, saying they're all Nazis and so on, without any proof or evidence and nothing at all. They're all Christians. Christianity is equivalent of Nazi, and fuck. So I want to see all the NGOs and all these people going after those folks just as aggressively as they would go after white people that criticise black and brown people. And then you have equality before the law. Now, if you have equality before, we don't have it at the moment. If you have equality before the law, then a lot of this anti-whiteism and its affirmative action would disappear overnight. You can't decide you're going to hire someone purely on skin color alone. Otherwise, you're going to end up in prison. This sort of thing. That would cure a lot of these issues. So a lot of the problems we see around, particularly the anti-whiteism, is this very selective application of the law. Technically, you can go after people for being anti-white. Technically, you can. But in reality, there's no NGO or government department or whatever that's prepared to do it. And we need to have that situation where there is equal funds to go after everybody for any sort of thing, or that they're all free to do it. You're free to hire whoever you want on the basis of merit alone, these sorts of things. And it would clear up so many problems that we have. Now, this has been deliberately done, and the Soviet communists did as did the Pol Pots and so on, the Mao Zedong. They created this ideological law. So if you had ever owned property, for example, you were already a bourgeois, evil fascist, so that your rights are much lower than someone else's. So a peasant could accuse you of something, and you had to accept that, and you didn't have the same rights in court, effectively, and it's like a street court. You didn't have the same rights in court because you'd been a property owner, and that meant you were bourgeois, which meant you were fascist, which meant whatever you said or any evidence you produced had no weight, and the accusation by the illiterate peasant was enough to have you thrown in prison. So this ideological law thing is of course a big issue as well. You've been attached to us today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.